Thank you so much for joining me for this episode with Dr. Modica. I wanted to have her on because I really wanted her to have this discussion with me about race in our culture and just race in the big overall extent of our society and what it really means to be honestly just racially conscious. And the reason I wanted to have that discussion mostly was because I really feel like we've lost the ability to have that kind of discussion. And I think people get uncomfortable, which, of course it's uncomfortable to talk about. But I think it's just so important to talk about because we can only heal the divide. We can only actually really lift each other up, our brothers and sisters up, if we're willing to have conversations filled with grace, filled with love, and ultimately, as Christians, filled with the Holy Spirit.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Dr. Modica, just tell us a little bit about yourself and just a little bit about your background.
All right. So I've been teaching early childhood education at University of Valley Forge. Believe it or not, I'm in my 28th year.
Wow.
It doesn't seem possible. Longer than you've been alive.
Yeah,
I've been
literally.
there, right? I'm originally from Queens, New York. Went to Queens College, which is where I got my undergrad and my master's at Queens. I also met my husband there, both from Queens. And we actually met through InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which is a fellowship group, a Christian group on campus. Yeah. And then wound up here because of really his career path. He wound up getting his PhD. But anyway, so while I was here and as I was teaching, I decided it was time to go for my doctorate. And so I went to Rutgers University in Camden, New Jersey, and got a PhD in what's called childhood studies.
Okay.
So it's not exactly education. Yeah. Education is more about actual teaching methods, and childhood studies is kind of a broader program that just looks at children and childhood and all different aspects of childhood.
So just like how they're raised,
it's really a kind of a multidisciplinary field. So it could be teachers, psychologists.
Did you focus on teaching or what did you focus on?
I didn't actually. I wanted to do something a little bit different because I had done early childhood education for my undergrad and my master's, and so my focus was really on race and how my dissertation research wound up being on how high school students perceive racial identity in the classroom as they're reading multicultural literature.
Interesting.
So by that I mean literature that talks about these kinds of issues, not just race, but gender and religion and, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so I studied quite a bit of what's called, what used to be called critical race theory in a good way, but now that's been kind of conscripted and taken to mean something negative, by some groups. But anyway, so I studied basically race relations and how young people perceive their own racial identity in lit classes, high school literature classes,
so
as they're reading.
From the perspective of maybe they're going through a book like The Mockingbird.
Exactly.
And like how they're responding to that book.
Exactly. Except we didn't do To Kill a Mockingbird because I was really with 10th and 11th grade. So what I did was for my research, I took a sabbatical from Valley Forge and I spent a whole semester shadowing a literature teacher who became actually a very good friend of mine. We're still good friends. And so because it was 10th and 11th grade, she did some other texts. She actually read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison with the 11th grade, which is kind of not an easy read in terms of content. And, lots of other books as well. We read The Kite Runner with the kids. I'm trying to
compared to Kill a Mockingbird, like how...
Well, similar, except that they were To Kill a Mockingbird was in the 9th grade curriculum. Yeah. But it's the same kind of idea. It looks at kind of multicultural issues and relationships through reading books about it.
That makes sense, yeah.
And so that kind of culminated in my research, which actually became a book. So I have it's my academic text, and it's called Race Among Friends. Okay. It was published by Rutgers University Press.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's an ethnography, meaning that the researcher kind of spends a period of time immersed with a certain group, and which is what I did. But it was a school ethnography.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where kind of I really I had an interest in it, in talking about particularly race relations before that, which is why I chose that as a dissertation topic.
Yeah.
But I got much more. I learned more about it through that research as well.
Definitely. Now, I'm actually kind of interested. What made you interested in, like, not only researching about race, but just being interested in racial issues and stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. People ask me that, and I think it just kind of grew over the years. Yeah. Not something I thought about a lot as a kid.
No.
But I think a real turning point for me was when I took a course on the master's level in multicultural ed. Yeah. And it was taught by someone that I really respected a lot. She passed away, unfortunately, but her name was Dorothy Hurley. And I just loved the way she taught this class. And I felt like I really learned so much in that class that then I was already teaching at Valley Forge. I kind of said to the people in my department, hey, I want to teach this course, multicultural ed. So that became my class.
Oh, that's cool.
And then I just kind of went from there. Yeah. So teaching and reading about it and talking about it, and then eventually studying it on the doctoral level.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, I kind of want to do a deep dive into not only some of what you've experienced in that research group and the research you've done, but just from the perspective of kind of a wider view of what racism is. What would you say racism is, even though everyone kind of knows what it is?
Well, I don't know if everyone knows what it is, actually. Yeah. And it's hard to, talk about something if you don't really know what you're talking about, There's lots of different definitions of racism. On an individual level, it's kind of like what we used to call prejudice. People don't use that term so much anymore, but it basically means making judgments about people based on their racial characteristics.
What group? Or something.
Yeah, or like stereotyping. Yeah. So that you just kind of make generalizations about people based on their background, and it kind of strips people from the individuality that they deserve, right? And so that's kind of like what most people think about. And so, so that's one definition of racism. But there are also broader definitions of racism as well. So you could also define racism as a system of advantage based on race. So because of our history, and we have a very kind of unique history in this country, which sometimes it's hard to face and people maybe would rather avoid, it seems like. But because of that history, certain systems have been put in place over not only decades but centuries that have created advantage for some groups and disadvantage for other groups. And so that's called institutional or systemic racism. And so, and so it's important to be able to look at it, not because I think for a lot of people that don't feel racist, like they don't have bad feelings towards people based on their background.
No, they don't realize, because I guess this is the way I've viewed racism, right? And this is part of actually how I grew up, in rural Pennsylvania, right? So I always saw racism as something of, I'm going to do a hate crime against you, something.
Right, yeah.
And then I viewed prejudice as, I'm making a generalization about someone. Would that be correct? Or
that's correct. That's one form of prejudice or racism. But hopefully, although I can't really say that for sure, but I would hope that is on the decline, especially since the days of pre-civil rights movement. You know what I mean? I don't know anymore if that's really true. So most people feel like, well, I don't feel that way. I don't feel, and I don't feel hatred towards groups of people for no reason, just because of what they look like or the color of their skin or whatever. So therefore, racism is gone. It's over. We solved that. We solved that with, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. And, and although those events were really, really important, I think it's also important to see that there's a legacy that still exists. And so it's important to look at certain aspects of our society to see where there might be still some systemic racism. For example, think about education.
Yeah.
So are children educated equally based on, no matter where they go to school, whether they go to school in an urban, highly under-resourced urban area or a very affluent suburban area? Mm-hmm. Well, the answer is no. They're not, because of the way schools are funded, and it's I don't want to get into a complicated issue, but
I do deep dive.
Well,
honestly,
some kids do get a better education than other kids.
It's true,
because education is not funded equally.
No,
and there's a lot of reasons for that. And there's a lot of reasons. It does
good
get
example
complicated.
of, right? I think this is like an element of systemic racism.
Mm-hmm.
I think a good example can be like, okay, so you have this mostly white, affluent, like county maybe, right?
Right.
And in that county, all these different schools are getting a certain amount of funding because all those different people, the local governments can rely on them to be able to tax them.
Right. There's a higher tax base.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you go to maybe like inner city Philadelphia as an example. And for instance, there might be like 30% Hispanics, 20% blacks, whatever. But the thing is that historically, there's been a lot of different systemic racism that has happened to those groups. Like, for instance, a good example would be like in the 60s, especially, or I'm kind of generalizing here, but in the 60s, like there would be a lot more policing, a lot more incarcerations towards black men, especially.
Right.
And so those areas got affected because all these men were actually incarcerated and sent to jail for petty theft, petty whatever.
Well, also drug use, whereas now people go to rehab, then they went to jail.
Yeah. Exactly. They weren't actually helped or anything
right,
like that.
Right.
And I think it's interesting, though, because I think this is something that, and I'm just going to say it, my own party, the Republican Party, gets, I think, wrong sometimes, of the fact of you have the idea of, well, you just need to pull up your bootstraps and keep on going. Well, you can't say that to every single group.
Well, there's a saying about that. You can't pull up your bootstraps if you don't have boots.
Yeah.
So
that's a great example, actually.
So yeah, that's very true. And like I said, it is complicated. So it's about the education, and there's a lot of really good, dedicated teachers in urban schools that are working so hard to try to provide a good education.
Yeah. And then those schools get like partially funded by the federal government because they can't rely on the local government. Right?
So it's not only about money, but it is partly about money.
It is partly.
It's hard to attract good teachers, qualified teachers, if you're not paying them, if you're not able to pay them a salary or a decent salary, or provide them with a working environment that is workable, that's not violent, that's not, you know what I mean? So there's a lot.
And I think it's unfortunate too, because as an example, my own mom, she works in an inner city school where she's a clinical psychologist, and she does a lot of work with a lot of people who might have a lot of things going on a lot at home, like abuse and stuff like that. And the thing is, though, is that without programs like that, a lot of these kids would never be able to get help and stuff like that.
Right.
And, it's just the fact, like every school has some level of that, but I think it's so much more important to focus on the schools that might not be able to get the same amount of funding, the same amount of resources, the same amount of support. Like, that's the thing.
And there's a lot of, and there's other supports needed as well. So it's not just about the school, it's about what's happening in the neighborhood, for example. Is there, violence in the neighborhood? Is it unsafe in the neighborhood? And what kinds of influences are there in the neighborhood that, the kids are being exposed to?
And I'm sure that, that changes their development.
Right, and kids bring all this into school with them, and sometimes it has to do with economic status as well. So poverty has very devastating effects on children.
Yeah.
One of the effects is that there's less language production.
Really?
And so sometimes they, in the home, even, not always, of course. I don't mean to paint in broad strokes, but sometimes, right? And so, and so they come into school a little bit behind because oral language is connected with reading and writing. And so they're already a little bit behind in that area. And so, there's a lot for the teachers to have to do to catch up. And that's why we have programs like Head Start.
Yeah.
Now that, of course, they're worrying about, I just actually visited a Head Start the other day and was talking to the teachers about it. Is it going to be funded? What's going to happen with the government shutdown?
Yeah.
Are they going to have to close their doors? And if they do, what's going to happen with those kids? So, it's a complicated issue, and there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing too is that when it comes to all these different, I think you said it well. It's not always about money, because
it's not always.
Let's say I'm a millionaire, I can't just throw money at everything.
Right,
and
it's not
fixes
that.
Itself. Where are the emotional support for these kids? Where's the emotional support for all of these programs that are being started? Because you can have the greatest program that has ever been funded ever and have a person that's leading it that doesn't care at all, and it'll end up as the worst program ever because you don't have a person.
And there's a lot of people out there working really hard
there is, yeah.
to give that kind of support.
Yeah.
But, it's challenging. It's challenging. And, that really comes down to the way, our neighborhoods were formed, the way certain people were kept out of buying homes in better neighborhoods because of another type of systemic racism, which, the real estate, that whole real estate industry, which, going back to redlining and where the federal government and the banking industry actually kept people out.
Yep.
They actually redlined a map and said, this is where you get to live, this is where you don't get to live. And so there's a legacy.
Exists.
Some of that does still exist.
As an example, right? I'm just going to give an example because I know many people will be like, well, give an example. I just know people I know and stuff like that. And for a good example would be counties, right? Sure, you can't discriminate against someone that's interested in buying something, but a county or someone could discriminate against someone that wants to build something. Mm-hmm. So you could be even though you can't say the reason, you could be well, I don't want this Indian family moving in, for example, or I don't want this Muslim family moving in, so we're not going to give them the permits to be able to build their house, for instance. And that happens. It does.
I'm sure it does.
But it's just the idea of that this systemic racism still exists and still influences people to this day. And I think that's the conversation people don't have.
And there's also something about, because of the legacy of the way people were kind of kept out, some groups were not able to accumulate wealth. So there's a difference between wealth and income, right? So wealth is when you have money, for example, you own your own home. You own things that appreciate. Yeah. And so people have been able to do that over generations, and so pass a little bit of that wealth down, whereas other groups who had to live in areas and neighborhoods that depreciated, didn't appreciate in value, were not allowed to accumulate that wealth. And so they're kind of still catching up. Yeah, exactly. And so those are all really good examples. And the criminal justice system is another example where if you have enough, unless you're doing a violent crime, but for nonviolent, say drug-related crimes, if you have the money to pay for a good attorney, you might be able to avoid jail time. Yeah. Whereas you don't.
If you just have a public defendant.
Right. You may not have the money. And so these are all things that still exist that are, as you said, they're a little bit hard to talk about.
They are.
But the thing is, if we can't see our existence in a vacuum, I wake up and I don't feel prejudice and I don't feel hatred toward anybody, therefore it doesn't exist anymore. Therefore, and here's how things have kind of twisted and turned around, talking about race at all is considered racist.
Yeah.
So there are some that
I didn't think about that.
Just having this conversation and pointing out race at all. Well, you're talking about race. Yeah. Therefore, we need to be colorblind. You're racist just by bringing up race or talking about race. And that's how it's kind of been turned around, and which has made it even more difficult to talk about. But there's a very famous author by the name of James Baldwin, who's, passed away, quite a while ago now. But he said something. He said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it's faced. And so it's important to have these conversations, even though it can be difficult. But I think if people come into the conversation with an open mind, thinking like, hey, nobody's blaming you. No. Nobody's calling you racist. It's fine.
I think what's happened in this polarized society right now, at least, is like a lot of people on the right are like, oh, you're going to call me racist just because I vote this way, or you're going to call me racist just because I grew up this way. And so then they automatically get defensive. Like,
there's a lot of defensiveness, yeah.
And then on the left, you have an attitude of, oh, well, not really blaming the right. I mean, some do, obviously. Mm-hmm. And there's enough to be said about the right. Don't get me wrong. But the left, too, they also say like, oh, well, the reality is that you need to be more inclusive of these different programs or these different ideas. And therefore, if you speak out against any of it, you're racist. So if any discussion happens, you're racist. So it happens to
So it's like
sides.
The labeling, you get labeled right away, and that just shuts everything down.
It does.
And so there's no opportunity for actual conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I'm working on a kid's book right now, and it's not, anywhere near done yet. It's still kind of in a, being formed. But the idea of it is, like, what does it feel like to be in that in-between space? Because I've always felt like I've been someone that could kind of see more than one side to an issue. Yeah. And, and so that's like an uncomfortable space to be in, because then both sides are mad at you, basically. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But I think we have to be able to negotiate that in between a little bit more effectively if we're going to ever get to a place where there can be some healing and there can be some understanding. One of the most important things that I try to talk about in my teaching, especially I teach the multicultural ed class at Valley Forge, is, my goal is just to have people see from different perspectives. That's it. I don't want to change anybody's opinion about anything, but just before you form that opinion, look at it from somebody else's point of view. Yeah. And just open up a little bit to that. And I think maybe that is something that we all need to learn how to do. Yeah. Whether we're in college or beyond college.
Exactly, yeah. And, I kind of want to get your thoughts on this, but what do you think? Because, like, I feel like it's just become such a kind of like, obviously polarized, but like such a huge, not even issue. It's just like, it's like a, as you said, there's definitions that aren't clarified, right? What do you think about the conversation surrounding DEI from the perspective of, for instance, the right says from the point of view of the right, they say, oh, well, DEI shouldn't exist because you're only hiring or including someone based on skin color.
So that's, again, that's a misconception. Yeah. So, as I tell students, it's okay to be against something, but you should know what it is before you're against it, right? Yeah. So DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, or what used to be called affirmative action, and now we're calling it DEI, was never meant to put people in positions that they're not qualified for. Yeah. The idea was, because of our history, which we have to remember, right? I mean, it's very sad and scary to me now that we even have like curriculum that is trying to forget history or rewrite history, right?
Definitely.
But because of the history of our country, which we're not presently to blame for, it's not about feeling blamed for it, but it did exist, right? The playing field was not equal. Right? Certain groups, as we were saying, were not able to get the same kind of education. We're not able to, or there was a history of racism in hiring in the past, right? Yeah. And so these efforts in DEI were really meant to equal the playing field. So not to hire somebody who's not qualified, but to be a little bit more intentional about looking for people of color who maybe didn't have opportunities, but who are qualified.
Especially in the past, hiring practices were racist. Mm-hmm. And I think that even now, even with DEI, this can be the case of the fact of like, you have, and this is an actual study that I read, of the fact of you had multiple corporations who actually like, they went through through their HR, through their HR arms, they were able to gather this data to see that any names that weren't, so any applicants that had names that weren't
Yes, I know that study. I know that study,
they weren't hired because they assumed they couldn't speak English.
Well, like if a person was named Joseph, they got the job. But if they were named Jose, not just get the job, they didn't even get called for an interview.
They didn't, because they just assumed, they don't speak English.
Right.
Which I think, I just...
And they might have assumed other things as well.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't know what they
were
assuming.
Yeah, exactly. But I think personally, like, that should be the goal of the DEI, of rooting out this attitude of, they have a foreign name, so therefore we're not even going to call them. Because as you said, if I have 3 different names in front of me, Jacob, Jose, and Jake, I don't know, something like that. But Jose might have a lot of different things on his resume compared to the other 2.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go invite Jose because he might be more qualified than the job. I can't make an assumption just because he might have originally been from Mexico or something like that.
Right.
As an example.
Right.
And I think that too, that's a huge issue too, of the fact of like, you have the assumption that, someone acts one way just because they're from this ethnic group.
Right. Well, that's
that.
Stereotyping. It's creating generalizations about people based on, traits. And that is a form of racism.
Yeah.
And we do it. Sometimes we do it and we think we're being positive about it. Like, for example, I use myself as an example. So I'm Italian-American, right?
Yeah.
So somebody might say, you're Italian, you must be a good cook. Well, that's a stereotype. Now, they might mean it as a compliment, but it's an overgeneralization based on my background, right? So if I'm Italian-American and I'm not a good cook, then I guess I lose my Italian card. Yeah. And and it makes, so it's kind of, again, it strips me of my individuality.
Or like, this is a meme on social media of when every fall comes around, that the idea of every white girl likes pumpkin spice lattes,
right? Yeah,
something like that,
right? And those are right, and those are kind of silly overgeneralizations. But it can be dangerous because it can limit people.
Yeah.
Because if I say, "Oh, you're good at this," maybe what I'm not, the rest of the sentence that I'm not saying is, "But you're not good at anything else." Do you know what I mean? And so those kinds of things, even if and sometimes people say things and they don't really mean any harm. They don't realize the harm behind it. No. But whenever we take away individuality and make people feel like they have to be a certain way, exactly. Based on their background, whatever physical traits, that's also a form of racism.
That's why even in a country like America, even though we're the melting pot of the world, you still see ethnic groups kind of create, cliques of people of the same ethnic group.
Yeah, and sometimes, that's okay. I mean, we like to...
No, I'm not saying there's anything wrong.
We like to be with people who are like us. We want to celebrate our heritage, and that's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
But what we don't want to be is exclusive, where we're leaving people out. Yeah, exactly. Or we're looking at people in a judgmental way of, you do this, you're not like a regular person. We're regular, you're not, or something like that. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that I think that's just the case of, just like, for instance, a good example is, and I like to use this story because it's just the fact of like, it's really the type of person you really are. That's what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come down to your political affiliation. And this was while I was in college. But basically it was 2020. It was like the election between Biden and Trump, and, I was wearing my Trump hat around campus, right? And the thing is, though, is that was interesting because, like, the people, some of my friends at the college, right, they called the other people who were also Trump supporters racist, right? But they never called me racist. And so I said, "Why don't you call me racist?" And I was just like honest. I was just like, I'm just curious. And they said, "It's because you're nice."
Well, because they knew you.
Yeah, it's because they knew me.
They knew you.
And this is the thing, like, it's a small campus, granted.
Right.
And so, like, everyone knows each other, but it's just the fact that, like, I never had this attitude of, it's kind of hard to describe because, like, I don't see myself as one thing, right?
Well, you probably...
And even though I would support, like, a political side, right?
Right.
It's not like I'm intentionally trying to beat down another side.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, you come across as a very open and a person that wants to learn, and that goes a long way. That means a lot.
Well, thanks.
Good. Good for you.
And at the end of the day, too, it's like, it's hard to have this conversation because, like, for instance, I know just from this video, people will message me and be like, what did you mean by this? What did you mean by that? Because they're, like, nitpicking and all this other things about about race and stuff
Right.
like that because they don't think it's an issue. And so what would you say to that? Like, why do you think it's become such a weird conversation on the right, especially?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's something called white fragility. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I was actually going to bring it up.
Yeah, that's a phrase coined by somebody named Robin DiAngelo, who wrote a book about it. And it's basically talking about that feeling of defensiveness that you can get. I like to look at it, because I'm an early childhood education person, I like developmental theory. I like to look at things in that, in those terms. And so there's actually theories out there about how we form our racial identity. So how do white people, for example, not just, how do I know that I'm white? I mean, I can look in the mirror and see that, but what does it mean to me to be white? How do I form that identity of being a white person? And the same for anyone from any background, right? Yeah. So for white people, there's the theory that was proposed by somebody named Janet Helms says that we go through stages of racial identity development, just the way kids go through stages of cognitive development or emotional development. Yeah. Our racial identity is also something that kind of grows through stages. And a stage that can happen, that can begin in adolescence when kids are exposed to hearing about racism, for example, for the first time. For white people, they may develop this sense of guilt. Like, and I saw this in my research, that going back to my dissertation research on the high school level, like, we're talking about race, I'm white, you're making me feel guilty. Because white people were responsible for racism, whatever, decades or hundreds of years ago. Now you must be saying that I'm responsible as well. And so even if the person is not saying that, they can kind of take that on themselves. Interesting. But the interesting thing about this theory is that it sees it as part of the developmental journey. So it's almost like you have to kind of go through that.
That makes sense.
And own it and then get past it to get to the point where you can say, well, wait a minute. No, I'm not personally responsible, for any of these bad things. Yes. And actually part of the theory says that you can kind of get stuck there.
You can't get stuck there.
Yeah, you can get stuck there.
I feel guilty, so I'm going to be defensive.
So I'm going to be defensive, angry. I'm going to be angry, and I'm going to be kind of shut down, and I don't really want to talk about it. And actually, in my research, we came across that. There was, in one of the classes in particular, there was a group of white kids who exactly were going through that and were kind of angry. And they kept saying, no matter, what we read or what we talked about, they would say, why do we have to talk about this? This is all we ever talk about. It wasn't all we ever talked about at all, but in their minds it was. And it was kind of easy to see that they were going through those feelings of shame, of guilt. And, we had to try to help them get past that. So it's, when you look at it that way, this is very normal. Yeah. The thing is, we don't want to get stuck there.
No, you don't.
We want to be able to say, okay, I'm feeling defensive. I'm feeling guilty. Yeah. I have to understand that nobody's blaming me. It's not my fault. No. Now let me get past that and listen to what other people are actually saying. Yeah. And be able to hear from somebody else's point of view. Yeah, definitely. Because my experience is valid in that it's my experience, but it's not everybody's experience.
No, you can't.
And so we can't kind of project that onto other people.
Exactly. Like
to use a Freudian term, which is another theory.
Yeah. Okay. You can't take the experience from the perspective of a white male. Like I can't take the experience of the idea of, I came from a socioeconomic background where I could go to college and I could rely on my mom and dad to help me with like Parent Plus loans and stuff like that, as an example, right? Like some people don't have that.
Not everybody had that opportunity.
And so it's just the idea of it's understanding. And I like that. Even though people identify as like a woke term, I like the term of white fragility because that's what it is.
Yes.
Well, they're not willing to ask the question.
Here's another thing, the term woke. This is a pet peeve of mine because woke used to, and in my mind, it means something good, to wake up.
Oh, yeah.
To wake up. And there's scripture, wake up. Where it's somewhere in the Old Testament, it's floating around somewhere. Wake up, you who slumbers. Don't sleep, right? Even Jesus in the parables, right, of the 10 virgins some were ready, kind of sleeping, some were awake and ready. So being awake, being aware of what's happening, of other people's experience, of how I can be a help to other people. To me, that's a very good thing and a very Christian thing. But again, that term has been twisted.
The term has become to
something
mean
bad.
like you're a lunatic.
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a smart strategy to take these terms,
take a turn,
and turn them around and twist them and make something negative out of them.
Well, and I think social media has added to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It amplifies everything.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's like you take one belief and you can amplify it by 100 in social media. And I think that's the reason why the right especially gets so defensive about race, because they assume that every liberal, every Democrat, every someone is out to get them.
Well, that's
quote,
again,
unquote. That makes sense.
Not that I want to put people in little stages and boxes, because people aren't like that. But
I can say it because
normal,
I'm a Republican and people understand.
I mean, it's normal in a sense. It's normal in a sense to have those feelings.
Yeah.
But the idea is to get past those feelings.
That makes sense.
And be able to say, "Oh, okay, so no, you're not talking about me in particular, but let's take a broader view of society." Of our past, of our history, and we're better than we were, but we're not there yet. And what can we do then to make it better? And as a Christian, I feel like that's really important. I feel like that, that God calls us to care about other people, and those other people might have a different experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Bible's pretty clear when it says that. I mean, literally in the Bible, it literally says, race isn't a barrier. They are your brothers and sisters in Christ. Right. You know what I mean? Jesus is very clear about that.
And bear one another's burdens.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't do that if you deny someone else's experience.
Exactly.
So it's
because I think that bearing each other's burdens isn't just, obviously charity is great, obviously. But it isn't just charity, but it's being emotionally available.
Right.
To
and understanding a person's point of view, their experience, and why they maybe believe something different than you believe because they're seeing it through a different lens.
Yeah, exactly. So. I agree with that. Now, I kind of want to get into some of your books, especially the Reclamation and stuff.
Okay.
Because I really want to talk about, and I think we're actually, in some ways, seeing a form of Christian nationalism take the stage in America in a way that's kind of, honestly, I didn't see it coming personally. Like, there's this movement of Christians who really believe that the state should be basically run by Christians, which is, I understand the idea because it's like, oh, if a Christian's in there, they're going to make the right decision all the time. It's like, well, we're all fallen. We all mess up. We're not perfect. But it's just the idea of they're not even using Christianity in its purest form. They're actually just using Christianity to basically promote a political agenda.
Right, and to gain power.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that your book, The Reclamation, does this very well of the idea of like, well, if you sign, and I don't want to spoil a lot of it, so tell me if I'm sharing too much. But as an example, though, like, I think the thing I think you did really well in your book, The Reclamation, is you really like showed how this could become a reality of the fact of, oh, well, in order to be a citizen of this country, in order to receive the benefit of your socioeconomic status and stuff, you have to become a Christian. Right. You have to sign the creed. Not even just become a Christian, but you have to sign the creed and say you agree
so that's
to
the
party's
premise of the
ideals.
book. It's about this young girl whose name is Wiley, because she's always asking why, who is growing up in the near future, our future, where Christianity has become the state religion. And the reason it's become the state religion is because some documents were found where Thomas Jefferson recanted his writings about the separation of church and state. So, which is what we have right now in the U.S., right? So, so these writings kind of take over, and and the Reclamation begins as a movement, and Christianity becomes the state religion.
Yeah.
And so in my story, it kind of creates this kind of like an upper class and the second class citizens. So anybody who agrees and becomes a member of what I call the church state, they get all the benefits of economics, right? They get the better jobs, better education. And anyone who doesn't sign on to the dogma, like Wiley and her mom, they're kind of second-class citizens. So that's kind of the basic premise of the story.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, because, like, the second-class citizens, some, like, a lot of them are actually real Christians, because they understood that the document they signed wasn't really about Christianity.
Right. It's just this kind of false Christianity is really what it is.
And I think, unfortunately, you're actually seeing some of that in America right now, where people idealistically, they associate Christianity or anything that's, as social media says, based. Are you familiar with that term?
No, what is it?
So it's called being based. So being based means you're like into traditionalism, you're like maybe Catholic or Orthodox or something like that, but you're very based in like your beliefs, you're conservative, stuff like that. But it's a term on social media that people use. It means you're based. Yeah.
Okay. I haven't heard that.
But but the thing is, though, is that people associate being based, as I said, right, as you're a Christian. Or they associate, I'm a conservative, so therefore I'm Christian. Like,
well, unfortunately, maybe, or fortunately, that's not what Jesus said.
No.
Right? So, I mean, there's a lot that can be said about that, but
yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, a lot of what's out there is kind of the opposite of what Jesus said. So I think we have to kind of, we're good to have our own political views, and that's what makes America great. But we also, as Christians, we have to try to be authentic with our Christianity.
And I think that, like, the good example is how some people will send me reels on Instagram, and they'll be like, is this what Christianity is? And it'll be like, as an example, you had Pete Hegseth the other day post the Lord's Prayer, and then like fighter jets in the video flying past while he's reciting the Lord's Prayer. It's like, that has nothing to do with God.
No.
But okay.
I don't think so.
No. And like the whole idea is that they're feeding into this idea of this Christian nationalism, of this idea of, we're the conservatives, we can do no wrong, we're the one trying to spread moralism throughout America.
Well, moralism isn't the same as Christianity.
No, it isn't.
And also, people have different ideas of what is moral. And like some people would say that, fighter jets are inherently immoral. It might be a necessary evil, right, because of the world we live in, and I understand we have to protect ourselves, etc., but it's certainly not a symbol of Christianity. The symbol of Christianity, the cross. Yeah. Someone giving his own life. Mm-hmm. A sinless, perfect person. Exactly. Giving his life for us, for our sin. That's a symbol of Christianity.
Absolutely.
So.
And I think that, and like, sorry, I didn't mean to get off the book.
I
had just gotten to this whole thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's unfortunate too, because like, as someone said, right, conservatism, you can't have conservatism without Christianity, because that's the whole idea what conservatism is based off of, Judeo-Christian values. And like, not everything, obviously, because like conservatives have the idea we're going to preserve tradition. We're going to preserve all these different things.
Well, that's not Christianity. That's traditionalism.
No, it isn't. But the idea is like a lot of people have been saying, especially on, I guess, on the right, have been saying you can't have a healthy form of conservatism without Christ. You can't be a true conservative without Christ being the center of your life, per se. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where they get the idea of, I can do two things at once. I can promote this Christian nationalism and also be a Christian. And I think that's where that comes from. But that's just my opinion.
I don't know.
But to get back to the Reclamation, I think it's interesting, however, that you include characters who would be outcasts and the idea of like a Christian state, per se. Mm-hmm. because, I mean, and you can correct me if you're wrong, but when I read it, it seemed as though the church itself ran the government, basically.
Right.
Did it seem like?
Well, a kind of a warped version of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I think...
And imposed their idea of religion on everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting, though, because I think that that's what people think they want. To an extent.
I don't know. I mean, I guess so. It's hard for me to kind of imagine why, because to me, the separation of church and state was what made this country great. Think about what they came from.
Exactly.
You know, the persecution that drew them here, right?
Church of England specifically being like,
right.
We're going to jail you. We're even willing to kill you if you keep like promoting your own religion, promoting your own beliefs.
So I don't know. And I mean, personally, I wouldn't, and think of other places like that are theocracies, like Iran, for example, where, you know, the religious element kind of rules, and it's very,
like you don't want that.
It's very oppressive. So
exactly.
I'm not sure. I guess what people feel like is, as long as it's my brand of religion, it's okay. But everybody else, that's their problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess.
Because, like, truthfully, it's like, even though we would proclaim ourselves Christians, and even though we know that's the truth, that Jesus Christ rose, that Jesus Christ died, rose again 3 days later, and went back, and now we receive the Holy Spirit through Him and through God. But it's the reality of people think that Christianity is rather an idea, rather than a belief,
rather than a relationship.
A relationship
with right.
Yeah, because like, and I think that this last week I got to talk with our youth pastor, and we talked a little bit about this, about the idea of some younger Gen Z men are coming back, and it's actually a trend. It's interesting, right? Because Gen Z women are more likely to be progressive and lean left politically, I guess you could say, and more Gen Z men are more willing to lean traditionalist / conservative, and a lot of people have been exploring things like the Catholic Church and Orthodoxy and like Christian Orthodoxy. And the point that I make with this, though, is that you see this gender divide of Gen Z, right? And it's interesting to see, though, because they're fed that algorithm on social media. Once you believe something, once the algorithm knows you believe something, it's going to try to keep you on that app for as long as it can.
And that's the problem, too. When you said, you know, was I familiar with the term based? The reason I'm not familiar with it is because it's not in my algorithm.
No.
So it doesn't pop up on my social media, right? Yeah. So that's another scary thing, Grant, talking about polarization, is that we're actually not all reading the same news. It's true. We're not really all knowing what's going on the same level, because depending on what news stations we listen to, or what websites, or what social media we're hooked into, we're getting a different story. And so it's kind of, I think people would be surprised. Some people don't even know. You'll say to them, well, have you heard about this happening? And they'll be like, no, I didn't hear that. Why didn't they hear it? Well, because the stations, the channels, whatever they're listening to, the news outlets that they're subscribing to aren't talking about it. They're talking about something else. So
exactly,
that's,
it's whatever.
I don't know what the answer to that is.
I think it actually comes down to, like, for instance, even though this conversation is great between you and me, right? It's not going to go viral. You know why? Because the algorithm doesn't use civil discussion.
Right.
The algorithm wants, this guy went to a protest and he got beat up because he was a Trump supporter, or
so
he was a liberal.
So maybe if we like picked up some chairs and
we just start beating each other,
then maybe
then we'll go viral.
We'd get some attention, right? So,
but it's just the fact, though, that, like, as our youth pastor said last week on the last episode, of just like, we live in our own echo chambers,
right?
And I think that's
very true.
Even more so in our race, in our identity of race and stuff like that. But
and political party, yeah,
absolutely.
True. Well, that's why people should read the Reclamation.
Yeah,
they might not agree with everything in it, but hopefully it would open their eyes to, what the risks of Christian nationalism, which is interesting. I didn't really start out to write a book about Christian nationalism at all. I started out with the thought of a character in my head. And actually I had a dream about a character, about a young girl riding a tractor across a deserted college campus. As you and I know,
as we know where it is.
And then just kind of one thing led to another, and I started asking questions, and it kind of, morphed into the reclamation. I got to ask, was the dorms that Wiley and her mom were living in, was that the marriage dorms originally in your head? I didn't have any particular dorm.
Like that's since my wife and I lived in the marriage dorms for a year. That's where my mind went. So I was like, I can just envision everything.
Part of the story has her in the beginning of the story. Actually, Wiley and a friend of hers discover this kind of basement underneath the library that they didn't know existed, and that came from a friend of mine, Kathy T. Kathy, if you're listening, shout out. She was, was a faculty member for a long time at Valley Forge. And we used to always joke about, somebody should write a science fiction story about what they find underneath the buildings. The old Army Hospital building, the tunnels and all that. And so that's kind of where that idea definitely came from.
I thought that was cool, though, because you kind of added some, futuristic things of,
so there is
VR
an element of fantasy. There's an element of sci-fi to the story as well. As it starts out, Wiley finds this box of old recordings of a theology class. They were recording it for distance education, and the class is about miracles in the Bible. And she doesn't know anything about miracles, or less about the Bible, but she starts watching these videos, and every video she watches talks about a different miracle, and then she goes out from there, and things start to happen in her own life that actually reflect the miracle in a way. Cool. And so that's kind of a bit of a fantasy element. And then a little bit later on in the story, she discovers this thumb drive in the archives in this basement of the library, and plugs it into this device, and is able to, through virtual reality, relive the story of someone who lived years previous, who was actually a graduate of the college. Her name was Abby. And so she goes back kind of through this virtual reality and lives Abby's story. Abby is a youth ministry graduate of the college who's in her very first position in the church and having a very difficult time. A lot of resistance. People are very mean to her. And this is actually based on a story of someone that I know who went through this. But anyway, Wiley, the girl who's in the future, through Abby is actually a true believer, a real genuine Christian who loves the Lord and loves people around her. And so then Wiley gets to see what Christianity really looks like through experiencing this story. And then it all kind of comes together in the end, past and present. But
actually, one of my favorite parts in the book, and forgive me if I mess up their name, but the bird people.
The avian.
The avian, those are my favorite parts of the book, because I don't know why, it's just the idea of these humans that kind of merge with maybe cybernetics or
they take on a bird persona.
Not a cult, but cult or whatever.
Well, it's kind of cultish.
But that was my favorite part of the book. I was like, this is so cool. I just thought it was really neat.
Good.
But it's interesting too, because eventually when they I don't want to do anything
no spoilers.
I don't know to spoil it. Sorry. We can't lose our faith when we are trying to be involved with politics and stuff like that.
Yes.
I don't know why I'm having
the merging of religion and politics is dangerous.
It is.
Can be.
It can.
Now, I think we vote based on our faith. So there's nothing wrong with that. But when we try to, take any one specific religious belief and give it political power, that's when it becomes dangerous. Exactly, and I don't think Jesus ever meant for that.
No, exactly. And I think it takes someone that's brave. It takes someone that is willing to accept the idea that I may have my belief that I know is true, because we believe in the God of the Bible, we believe in Jesus Christ, but I'm not going to let that blind me from trying to actually not only hear the other side out, right, depending on what your political party is, but also to never let that dictate how I treat other cultures, how I treat other people.
Right.
Because Jesus was the one that sat with the sinners, that sat with the
It's very
tax
important. The only group that he ever really got mad at were the Pharisees.
were the religious people.
So let's be
So that tells
careful
you a lot.
not to put ourselves in that position.
And I just think that that's revealing of the fact of like we need to realize that our religion doesn't save us.
Right.
Jesus saves us.
Right.
And I think if we communicate that more, we're going to see more people realize that. And more people, both on the right and left, come to a reconciliation point of, you know what, we're never going to fully agree. That's never going to happen.
Right.
But you know what's going to happen? An understanding of belief, an understanding of peace among parties, and an understanding of we can have differences and also do a lot of good. And I think that's what it comes down to.
I agree.
But to kind of close our discussion, what are some things you want to leave with people, especially people who might feel defensive? Like with our, even with our conversation, that may be like, what is this? Like,
yeah. I mean, I guess I would just say, you know, it's important to be open to other people's experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, your experience is valid. It's important, but it's not the only experience out there, right? And so if you want to truly love people, especially as Christians, right, you have to love them, not who you want them to be. So you have to understand their point of view and appreciate it and be willing to kind of lay down your own ideas sometimes. Because, you know, we don't know everything.
No.
Right?
Because I might be totally wrong.
We could be. And of course, we're all totally wrong. I mean, nobody's right about everything, right? And it's not even about right or wrong.
No.
It's about understanding and caring for people.
Yeah.
So, you know, to try to be, and so if people feel defensive and angry and, you know, like, okay, that's okay. Own those feelings, but then try to get past them because nobody is blaming anybody. Nobody is saying if you're white, you're racist or you're responsible for racism or, you know, you didn't create the system that we live in. You didn't create this world. You're a product of it. And so kind of get past that and then be open to how can I make it better?
And how do you think, like, how do you think people should be open to, like, especially if they're a Christian, how do you think they should be open to how God wants to speak to them through that? Because I feel like as Christians, no matter how we feel about race, no matter how we feel about people or ourselves, how do you think that we should approach that with God even? Because I'm sure you, as a Christian, you've probably had these conversations with God.
I mean, I guess you just have to pray. I mean, I know that seems very trite, you know, but not only pray, but read. I think it's important to let the Lord lead you to, you know, different reading materials, things that or you know, documentaries, things that you might not have been open to before. Just to kind of be able to gain a deeper understanding of, again, of the world that we live in and of other people's points of view. And then that's how the Lord kind of teaches you. You have to be teachable.
100%.
I think that's
I think
really
once you
important.
once you get past the negativity of calling someone right wing, calling someone left wing, calling someone woke, I think that's when you can actually have a real conversation. Yeah, those names, you know,
it's not really helpful.
No.
And it's actually hurtful.
Yeah.
So if your goal is to shut people down and to live in a little kind of, you know, little world of like an echo chamber, like your youth pastor said, then have at it. But if you feel like maybe God has called you to something higher, something better, something that, you know, he wants to use you for in this life, then you have to be open to that.
Because usually he calls us to things we're not comfortable with.
Right. So we have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
We have to be.
You know, there's no easy answers.
Exactly. And I think it takes courage to even say to your friends and say to people like, hey, you know, we need to be able to be people of light, people of love.
Right. And what is that? That's right.
We can't let our generalizations, we can't let our experience dictate the way we treat other people.
Exactly.
Even if it's people of just different opinion. It does. Sometimes it's not even about race. It's sometimes just opinion. But
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. Great, Grant.
Yeah, this has been awesome. But thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on the podcast. And I just have really enjoyed this conversation with you. And next week, I plan to have Pat Fitzgerald on. He is a hiring expert for many large companies and stuff like that. And I'm just excited to have a conversation with him as well. But thank you again for joining.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course.